Okay, says recording.
Hello, and welcome to CBSR's webinar on sustainable procurement. I'm your host, Leo Rothschild, the Executive Director of Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. I'm delighted to be joined by two remarkable guest speakers today, whom I will introduce momentarily. If you have questions at any point during this webinar, please send them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to address all of them. Before we begin, allow me to provide a short introduction to those of you unfamiliar with CBSR and a brief update for those of you that are very familiar with us. And really just to tell you that CBSR is, we have a network of 20 active member companies who work with us as part of a professional association. We have a reach of approximately 20,000 CSR practitioners and youth wanting to learn from and work in this space. In addition to running a professional association, we also manage a charitable foundation called the CBSR Education Foundation, which is responsible for developing the webinar series you're currently participating in and the thought leadership research, some of which I'll come back to in a minute. We've been doing this for 23 years. CBSR is Canada's original business network for corporate responsibility leaders, and we are standing on the shoulders of some of Canada's greatest thought leaders in the field of sustainability and corporate responsibility. Just as our founders did, we are still bringing people together and providing safe spaces for them to learn, share, and collaborate. And we do this because we firmly believe that Canadian business can and should be a positive force in the world. I'd also be remiss if I didn't briefly mention that CBSR is in the midst of a fundraising campaign. We are nearly ready to unveil the national online and live multi-city public engagement and media campaign we call Do Business Like a Canadian. There are still some sponsorship slots available, so please contact me separately if you're interested in learning more. For those of you that pre-registered for this webinar, you will have received an advanced copy of our newest research report called simply Sustainable Supply Chain Management in Canada. This research was compiled by our intern, Zoe Burney, who's done a terrific job examining 52 Canadian companies across 6 industries using publicly available information to see what programs were in place and tools being used to address key social, financial, and environmental issues in their supply chains. What was uncovered was a number of significant gaps, including the fact that few companies provide any financial risk assessment associated with their supply chain. Few companies, only 11% in fact, report any information about living wages in their supply chains. And a low number, 32%, provide any support or training for suppliers to adhere to procurement expectations and supplier codes of conduct. In the report, we provide 9 recommendations to address these deficiencies and move towards becoming a set of transformational, and to move towards becoming a transformational company, which you'll also learn about in the Sustainable Supply Chain Management in Canada report. If you didn't get an advanced copy, you can download a copy from our website, cbsr.ca, under our work and then research from the drop-down menu. You can also email us at info@cbsr.ca and we'll send you a copy. One other thing you'll find in the new report is a whole bunch of leading case studies, and one of them is this amazing partnership that we've learned about between HP and WWF Canada. That's why we invited our 2 speakers to tell us more about this unique partnership. And they are Francis Edmonds, Head of Sustainability at HP Canada, and Amy Castador, Living Planet, a work specialist at WWF Canada. I'm now going to hand it off to the 2 of them to walk us through the rest of the case and these slides.
Okay, thank you, Leo. Can everybody hear me okay?
I think you're a go.
Leo, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, Leo. I'm very excited to be here with Amy to talk to you about sustainable procurement. As I think about the topic, obviously we had a high degree of interest today in this topic, and I think we're starting to see that, and I'm sensing it across the country. So we're on the right theme here, and let's get started with what we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. And happy to take questions as we go. So here's what we're going to cover off today. We're going to talk a little bit about HP and our WWF partnership and what came out of it. And one of the things we are developing as a result of our partnership is a sustainable procurement toolkit, which Amy is working very hard on. You're going to get a sneak peek at this, but more importantly, we're going to be asking for some people to help us with this as well. One of the things that I have observed as a 30-year veteran of being a sustainability professional is that the topic of sustainable procurement is not one that either a sustainability person or a procurement person can solve alone. It's about partnerships. And so we're hoping you'll be able to learn a little bit from the partnership that HP and WWF have had, and maybe we'll want to step up and help us in this journey of purchasing the future that we want in Canada. All right, next slide, please. So a little bit about HP. We've got about a 75-year history in being a leader in sustainability, and this doesn't come easily. There's a lot of work goes into it, but basically we're a purpose-driven company. 76 years ago, our founding partner said, we're here to make a difference, and I think you'll see some of the ways that we're doing that today in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So we've recently been able to get legal approval to use the statement that we're Canada's most sustainable technology company, and there is a link on these slides to where you would go and find more information about that. But I've put a snippet of the many things that we've done as part of this journey, of course, being listed to Corporate Knights Global 100 Most Sustainable Corporations, the only technology company on Canada's Greenest Employers list, and many more accolades here. And I think one of the things you want to think about is the breadth of things that you have to do to be able to prove that you're Canada's most sustainable technology company. Next slide, please, and I'll hand it over to Amy to tell you about WWF.
Great, thanks so much, Francis. And I would also like to echo Francis in thanking Lior for giving us the opportunity to be here and present a little bit about this new sustainable procurement toolkit that we're working on. So first, I'd like to just give you a brief overview about WWF Canada. So we are a global environmental NGO. And so the work that we do in Canada, we have, of course, our own kind of internal conservation work, but we also, a big part of our focus is collaborating with a wide range of different stakeholders. And our goal is to really find long-term solutions to conserve wildlife habitats in some of the key priority areas that we've identified across the country. So, you know, things like the Arctic, for freshwater ecosystems, as well as for kind of our ocean and marine ecosystems as well. And one of the things that we're also focusing on is doing work to engage communities to become more resilient by taking environmental action, bringing sustainability to their schools and to their, to their campuses as well as to the workplace. So how do we work with business exactly? So there's kind of 4 key pillars. So you can see that we do work with business through the more traditional philanthropy, incorporating marketing partnerships. And we use that funding to invest into the really important conservation work that we do that I was just mentioning before. That really helps our mission. And we also work on more sustainable business practice. So what we do is look to find where that intersection is between biodiversity and business. And we want to collaborate with business to be able to find that mutually beneficial impact for conservation. And I also wanted to mention, so my role specifically is focused around employee engagement. So we have a program called Living Planet at Work, and this is a free program. It's an online hub that has a number of different tools and resources that are all freely accessible to help champions. So, all of you on this webinar right now are champions for your company. And Living Planet at Work provides a number of tools and resources to help you reduce that, that environmental impact and really build that culture of sustainability. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So why exactly do we work with business? And so what you're looking at right now is a slide featuring 4.7 planets. And this represents how many planets we would need to sustain the current population if everyone around the world lived like Canadians. So what does this show us? And I think we all on this webinar know, but human activities are putting an unprecedented amount of pressure on nature, on its resources, and on the ecosystem services that it provides. And this is a global problem. And because business drives so much of our national global economies, of course it's important for us to continue to maintain that. But they're huge contributors to environmental challenges that we're facing today. And we believe at WWF that we have a collective responsibility to solve some of these problems. And the most effective way for us to do that is to work together with companies. And if you could go to the next slide. We really think that the partnership that we've had in Canada with HP has been a great example of something transformational that we've been able to achieve as a cross-sector partnership. And so we've actually been collaborating for a decade now. And of that, we've been able to launch 2 programs that Francis is going to talk about in a little bit, but a lot of which are, they've really been able to have an impact across the Canadian landscape in terms of engaging individuals, employees, and now more recently, students on sustainability. And so we've been able to do this through tapping into each other's resources and expertise. This has benefited us as well because it allows us to build credibility within both organizations. We can increase employee engagement. It allows us to, build brand reputation by gaining new audiences, being able to cross-promote through each other's networks. So this partnership that we have is not something that's just good for the environment, but it's actually good for business, and it's good for kind of both WWF and HP's reputations. So if you go to the next slide, please. And so along the way and along this journey, we've really transitioned our relationship from that more transactional, one-off meeting sponsorship deliverables, for example, to, moving along that continuum of transactional to transformational. And that's the reason that our partnership is working so well. And some of the ways in terms of how we collaborate is, we look at and identify each other's strengths and expertise. We co-create certain campaigns, projects, and programs. The Sustainable Procurement Toolkit is a great example of what we're doing right now in terms of that. We make sure to keep communications open and honest. And we experiment and we learn from that, and we continue to pivot as we see fit. And so that allows us to continue to produce the appropriate materials that meet the needs of our audience as much as we can. Next slide.
So one of the things to think about here, and it was only late that I came to this realization, but of course, goal number 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals is partnerships. And obviously it's the last one because it's bringing all the pieces together, but we should all be just reminded of that. So just wanted to briefly touch on the 2 programs that we've built. The Living Planet at Work was the original program that we came together on. And you can see here some really impressive results from it. Over 1,700 champions registered with the program, actively doing work in reducing footprint and sustainability actions in the organizations. And they're not all businesses, I'd hasten to add, and they're not all necessarily in Canada. But it's also managed to raise over $1 million for WWF as well. So this program is firing on all cylinders. Recognizing that, we then turned our attention to what can we do in higher education. And this was just launched last week, a brand new program mirroring the successes we've had in the Living Planet at Work, now tackling the large student population we have, getting them ready to move into the workplace and flexing their muscles around just getting to work and doing stuff on campus. So That's okay, you can move to the next slide. So let's turn a little bit to buying the future we want. As I said, there seems to be, and maybe it's just, you know, when you're pregnant, you see pregnant women everywhere. Maybe it's just because I've turned my attention to this, but it really does seem to be that there's a lot of momentum in this space. And I particularly like Diane Sachs's sort of recommendations in her last climate change report. Very simple, good guidance on carbon in particular. And obviously when we think about sustainability, it's much more than just carbon. But this to me was a simple plan, do, check, act type scenario. And we are so far away from that today in Canada, it's a little disheartening. So we've got, the good news is the only way is up from here, and we've actually got quite a bit of work in terms of a new ISO standard, and the feds and the municipal governments themselves are doing quite a bit of work in this space, but there is so much more to be done. So as that is background, move to the next slide please. Amy and I have been working on this new toolkit called Sustainable Procurement, and we're trying to not replicate what's already out there, but we are trying to spark a movement. And here's a list of what's in it. And obviously there will be a lot more opportunity for you to have some input even, but we're trying to fill the knowledge and the action gap. And what we see today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that HP helped fund, there is, even where people think they're doing sustainable procurement, it is not really being executed very well, or it may only be being executed in one particular commodity. And you know, vehicles or sustainable seafood might be an example, but it doesn't mainstream across all procurement activities. So over to you, Amy.
Great, thank you so much. And if you could just go to the next slide, please. And I also wanted to, reiterate that with this toolkit, our goal really is to build that coalition of the willing. So we want you to use the toolkit when it comes out, hopefully, or it will come out later this fall, and tell us what you think about it, and tell us if there are opportunities for us to continue to evolve this thinking and move that needle forward. So we'll outline some of the things that we will talk about in the toolkit. The first being, what exactly is sustainable procurement? And really in a nutshell, what it is when we account for social, environmental, and ethical impacts of some of the services and products that we buy. And that also includes taking into account the sustainability efforts of the suppliers that you purchase from. And so you can see a few examples of some of the environmental and social criteria that you can consider if you're going to think about sustainable procurement within your business. I won't get into them. It's all in the toolkit. And then another thing that anyone who's thinking about sustainable procurement should consider is how the service or good can help you not just at the point of purchase, but really along its lifetime with you. So, one example that I can think of that's more of a simple example, but, thinking about the energy efficiency of products and how purchasing a more energy efficient product is going to help you save energy over that lifetime, over the course of that product's lifetime, versus something that isn't as energy efficient. Next slide. And why is it important for business? So practicing sustainable procurement isn't just something to do because it's the right thing to do, though, we at WWF, of course, think it is. But it's in the best interest of business as well. And this is really for two reasons. So first, if we don't act now in terms of changing our ways and changing our sustainability habits, businesses are going to start to face a number of new and increasingly material risks to their operations. And so there's a global risks report that was released by the World Economic Forum, and it's released every year. And it highlights some of the most pressing risks that we face. So these include all kinds, so societal, economic, technological, environmental, as well as sociopolitical. And 3 of the top 5 risks in this report were identified as being environmental risks. So things like natural disasters, failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation, extreme weather events, And this was the case in both terms of likelihood that the risk was going to happen, but as well as the terms of impact that that risk is going to have on society. And so these are really complex challenges that can create really big disruptions within your business, within your supply chains, and that can lead to cumulative as well as cascading effects for business. But on the flip side of things, practicing sustainable procurement can also present your company with a really great business opportunity. So a study by Nielsen, it shows that essentially the market for sustainable goods is growing. And so the survey that they did said that 66% of the consumers that were surveyed are willing to pay more for sustainable brands. And it can also open up certain opportunities for your business to find efficiencies throughout the supply chain, potentially streamline logistics. So according to the CDP, there's actually more than $14 billion in cost savings that was reported from their members in emission reduction projects that were associated with their suppliers and with their supply chain. So why isn't it happening then? One of the reasons that we identified, and one of the reasons that we think this isn't happening, in addition to a number of the other gaps that were identified, is because procurement and sustainability goals and the departments, they're not aligned in their strategies. And so that's the main reason that we created this toolkit, is to really help inform and empower champions to start that conversation and to bring those two areas together. And so what we want champions to do is to become that link that really aligns those two. So our toolkit is intended, for kind of that beginner audience, but what we want to do is provide them with a few key actions to help them get started and to help them take kind of practical steps. Next slide. Okay, so we've identified kind of 6 steps that a champion can take to get started. And so the first thing to acknowledge is, and if you want to just flip to the next animation, is you need to find the right support. So your work is going to be much harder if you don't find the right support to work with you. So think about who's responsible for making sustainability related decisions? Who's responsible for making purchasing decisions? Is there a senior leader that you can reach to receive top level support to help you? Or is there anyone else that you think might have some valuable insight? So the finance team could be an example of a department that can help you. And so we've suggested to try and bring all of these different perspectives and different people together and create a working group to help you get started. So of course that's much easier said than done. And so while, as a sustainability champion, as you're asking people throughout the organization to help you with this, you might come across certain barriers like, I don't have time to do it, or it's not my job, or it's too expensive, or the manager will never go for that. And so that's okay, and that's a challenge that we all face. But where there's a will, there's a way. And there's also one of the best things that you can do is follow some of these tips and build that business case, so to let them know that it is actually in their best interest, no matter what their role is, to practice this stuff and to start thinking about sustainable procurement. So a couple of tips. When you're thinking about who you're reaching out to, think about what their motivations are. So someone from the sustainability team is going to probably have different motivations for wanting to participate in a project like this or in sustainable procurement than someone who's on the procurement team or on the finance team even. So remember who you're talking to and really adjust your conversation to reflect that. And don't discount personal motivations either. So if you know that your CFO is really passionate about sustainability, then they might be a good person to involve in this project, and think about how you can use their passion for the environment and for sustainability to start that conversation with them. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, of course, if you're able to, quantify what that business case is. And I wanted to highlight a tool that is fairly recent that was released by Bob Willard, who is kind of a sustainability guru in terms of creating the business case. And he's actually created a free and open source tool to help you identify what the ROI is, what the return on investment is of investing in sustainability initiatives. So I would recommend that you explore that, and I would be happy to send that around. Though there is a link in the slides as well. And so I wanted to reiterate that, this step is going to be a big one, but once you have this buy-in from your colleagues, you're going to be set up for success much easier. And if this is something that you think might be a really big challenge, maybe consider, maybe that can be your goal for the next 6 months or for the year. So start small, think about setting that as your goal rather than thinking about, the bigger picture. So the next animation the next slide here is mapping out the processes. So, say you've created your sustainability procurement working group. Your next step is to take a bit of a deeper dive into what some of the sustainability and purchasing processes look like. And sorry, if you could just go back one slide. So think about, how to measure success, or how do the teams measure success? How do the sustainability and purchasing departments make their decisions? Is there any work that's actually currently already being done around sustainable procurement? So do you have existing policies, or is your procurement team reaching out to its suppliers and asking them questions already? So essentially what your goal here is really just to get an idea of what that baseline looks like within your company. And then that is going to help you to identify gaps. And in terms of identifying gaps, this is kind of one of the biggest reasons that we identified that we recommend creating a working group, is because a lot of the time you're not going to be the expert at this, and at least with our audience and with our champions, a lot of them do this at the side of their desks. And so we want to bring these experts together to help identify what those gaps are. And then once you've identified those gaps, really breaking down those silos. So if you see that there's, one example could be if there's a sustainable procurement policy in place, but procurement is actually not practicing it. How can you start to, fill that gap, or how do you address that inconsistency in a way that both the sustainability and the procurement teams can be in agreement with? And so one of the ways that we've learned that you can start doing that, and that you can kind of get sustainability and procurement on the same page, is to think about some common metrics to measure that success. So if you go to the next slide. And one of the metrics that can really help you is something called the total cost of ownership. And what this does is it considers the costs associated with a service or a product throughout its entire life cycle. So not just at the upfront purchasing stage, but also at the processing stage, the storing, the transportation, and the disposal as well. And it can help you really get a full picture of how much that good costs throughout the entire life cycle. And so I'll give you one example right now that you may have come across before, or maybe not, but it's kind of a good simple example to show just how effective this can be. So purchasing FSC certified paper. So FSC, for those that don't know, is a certification for sustainably sourced wood and wood products. And so, yes, it is true that the upfront cost of purchasing FSC certified paper is more expensive than non-FSC certified paper. But that initial cost, like I mentioned, is just a small piece of the puzzle. So when you think about total cost of ownership, you can get that full picture and realize that maybe throughout other elements of the life cycle, there are some inefficiencies that you can get rid of, or some other ways that you can offset those costs. And so one example in this case would be reducing paper consumption. So if you're able to reduce the total amount of paper that you use within your organization, that's going to save on distribution costs, storage costs, as well as kind of that the initial procurement cost, because you're just buying less of it. And you might even be able to make that case to say, you know, the actual cost of purchasing this paper is actually the same. Purchasing FSC certified paper is actually the same when you consider all of this. Next slide. So the next step, once you've kind of broken down those silos, you've identified the gap or the gaps that you're looking to solve, you've gotten on the same page in terms of, you know, how you're looking to move forward and what metrics you want to use to collectively move forward. Your next step is to set a common goal. And so this is where we want to challenge you to think about something that, of course, is going to satisfy both the sustainability department and the procurement department. And so one of the ways that you can kind of get started, if you go to the next slide, one of the tips that we have is to start small. And you really can set yourself up for success by, you know, thinking about, for example, instead of thinking about your entire organization, think about a specific product or a specific product line that you want to try and test and learn things with. Or set a goal around the percentage of your total procurement spend for a particular product or product line. And so if you're unsure of where to start, one of the things that you can do is look at eco-labels and look at them to guide you. So there are a few common and credible ones, some of which WWF has actually helped to establish. So those are ones like FSC, which means sustainably sourced wood, MSC, which deals with sustainably sourced seafood, Energy Star, which is around energy efficiency, as well as BCI, which is based around a sustainably sourced cotton. But I just wanted to caution you on eco-labels and really wanted to highlight to be careful about which ones you choose if you decide to go that route, because a lot of eco-labels are more credible and a lot of eco-labels are a little bit less credible. So just make sure you do your homework around, you know, which ones you're looking at. Make sure to visit their websites, see what their methodologies are before you decide to commit to procurement using one of them. Next slide. And then finally, track your progress and pivot where you need to. So this step is actually something that you should be considering throughout the entire 6-step process. It's something that you should continue to monitor throughout. And, you know, using that model that WWF and HP use, which is essentially ideate. You want to ideate. You want to test it out. And then if something's not working or if something's going slower than you expect, pivot your model to try and solve that problem and get back on track. And if for example, some of this is going really successfully for you, we don't go into depth on this in the toolkit, but you know, some of the things that that you might want to consider are thinking a little bit more holistically about sustainable procurement at your organization. So thinking about changing policies or thinking about conducting vendor surveys, or even, you know, setting science-based targets, which I won't get into right now, but if you have any questions about that, happy to answer them, and I'm sure Francis will as well. But really, just to kind of reiterate, this toolkit is meant for, you know, that beginner audience, and we really want to highlight some of the practical steps that they can take to really just align the sustainability and procurement departments together. And I'm going to take it over to Francis now, who's going to talk a little bit more about HP. And HP is a leader in the sustainability procurement space. So if you're on the line and you're thinking that this doesn't quite apply to you, Francis will be talking a little bit more about that high-level information and kind of more systemic information and strategic information from HP.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, next slide, please.
Oh, sorry about that. Just wanted to reiterate, if you're not an expert, that's okay. It's a long journey, but if you're not going to start this, then maybe there won't be anyone in your organization that does. Next slide.
Okay, and let's move on, please. Next slide. Okay, so we talked a little bit about eco-labels and some tips, but I wanted to bring this back up to the big picture here. So many of you will not have seen a company's footprint expressed in this way. And a couple of things that really stand out to people when they see this for the first time, and this is fully audited data, so you can believe the numbers. So what you can see here is for HP, a 50,000 person company globally, this is how our footprint breaks down. So roughly half of our impact is with our customers using our products, and the other half is in our supply chain. And typically when people focus on procurement, sustainable procurement, they only want to focus on supply chain. And that's important for sure, but what about actually using the products while you have them, the products and services while you have them? So you need to think about that as well. The other thing here, of course, is that for a 50,000 person company, our own operations are a very small, if not almost insignificant part of what we do. So yes, we still have to work in that space, but our efforts should be really focused on the other two areas. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to make sure that we can bring the circular economy to life. And this looks a little complex, but really it's taking the Ellen MacArthur concentric diagram thing and putting it into HP speak, where we talk about how we're going to move to the circular or low carbon economy. And the first thing is, of course, being able to offer services that so that rather than offering products that customers buy, we want to be able to offer them as a service. Actually, we'll have a lower footprint in the long run because we can give them second lives, etc., etc. But those products have to be maintainable and upgradable. And if you're not looking at repairability of electronic products, you're missing the boat. And that really should be counted in when you buy it as a service rather than as a good. You want to be able to reuse and refurbish equipment, and then when that can no longer happen, you want to make sure that you've got very strong material recovery and reuse. And of course, the exciting thing is with 3D print today, all of this is enabled by 3D print. And I don't know if you've seen the news this week, but HP just announced we'll be able to print in metal moving forward, and the possibilities of that are just amazing. We talk about the fourth industrial revolution. It is coming down very fast. So it's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. So what do we need to do? We need to scale the circular economy, and that's great for manufacturers like HP. We can offer you products or services that are playing in the circular economy, but if nobody is buying with circularity in mind, it's not going to work. It requires everybody to participate in this. So some of the things we're doing is for sure looking at closed loop recycling, reuse and refurbishment, and we've been doing that. And the great news is we're actually doing global closed loop plastic processing happens in Canada, in Montreal. We have a worldwide expert company there. We're looking at new business models. So we're trying to push customers to go for service-based offerings. And that has so many implications. So you'd notice if you were looking at it in all of the slides, we've reversed goods and services. We say services and goods just so that we put it the right priority. And of course, future is this breakthrough innovations, which 3D and metal 3D printing is certainly going to do. So what does that look like in practice? Next slide, please. So I talked about this closed loop plastic recycling that we're doing. We don't get enough of our cartridges back, so we have to use plastics from other sources. And today we're using plastic from used drinking water bottles. We're using 1 million used drinking water bottles a day in our Montreal facility. And we're also using used clothes hangers because they're a good source of clean plastic. And we're able to put those back into new products, making the plastic as good as virgin plastic would be. And that would be great in itself because we're diverting stuff from landfill. But when you look at the fact that it has a lower footprint, it's saving on energy and water, it's cheaper for us to do this. This is really the sweet spot for this. So this is possible. And we are selling today products that are made with closed loop recycled plastics, but not a single customer is buying with that in mind. Next slide, please. If you're really going to impact sustainable procurement, you want to be designing your products with the environment from the minute you're designing them, not as an afterthought. And HP has been doing this since 1991. We've had a formal program for that. Next slide, please. So just turning to supply chain operations, looking at the kinds of commitments, and it's great that CBSR has done this work on supply chain in Canada. I just also printed off the CDP version of it. There's a lot of work to be done in this space. Good news is companies like HP have been working in this space for a long time, and there are some good metrics out there. I would point you to an organization called Know the Chain, who are looking at working conditions, and organizations like ourselves that are setting some very aggressive goals, not only to build capacity in the supply chain, but also to reach out to the individuals who are working in the supply chain. Next slide, please. Human trafficking doesn't sound like something that really applies in Canada, but it does. And of course, in many very lengthy supply chains, like you'll find in the electronics industry and beyond, there are a lot of issues. And we've done some really good work in this space. So just wanted to give you a quick view of that. Next slide, please. So I said that HP had worked with a company called Shift and Build, Monica DuPont, and the Academy for Sustainable Innovation. And we looked at sustainable procurement in Canada today, and these are some of the findings. It wasn't a very large study, but in looking at the picture as a whole, here are some of the findings that we've had. And it's quite disheartening and discouraging because, you know, I thought we would have been further ahead in Canada. But in particular, this lack of link of how procurement plays into meeting other sustainability goals that the organization might have. It seems to be very disconnected. And 99% of customers are buying just based on price alone. And if there are sustainability metrics in there, they're not mandatory and they have very little scoring. So next slide, please. We have some recommendations about how we're going to tackle changing this in Canada. And again, back to Shift and Build, put this together, did a great job. There's a lot of opportunity here, and every one of us could be working on at least one of these things. HP is putting our money where our mouth is, and we're putting quite a bit of effort into working on these things. And in particular, at the end of this month, there will be an award at the Clean 50 for sustainable procurement, so we can check that box. But there's often more opportunity for that. So I'd encourage all of you to look at this list and see what you can do to contribute to helping solve some of the issues that we have here. And in particular, on the left-hand side there, the Action Learning Lab. We actually have mapped this out. We're able to offer this through the Academy for Sustainable Innovation. We just need some willing participants to step up and say, yes, we want to learn more about this, and really to create that coalition of the willing or the eager to really start to tackle this problem. Next slide, please. So wrapping it up here, I would really argue that procurement is the single most effective tool for driving sustainability. And I would argue that today it's the least well used. We've got a lot of commitments out there as Canadians. We said we're going to do a lot of stuff, not much evidence of it yet. I'd come back to Diane Sachs's recommendations in that report that is just related to greenhouse gases, but I think you could apply it across the board. Let's start getting some metrics out there, looking at how we're buying and what we're buying, and really start to tackle this head on. Next slide, please. HP does have some guidance for you if you're struggling. Technology is a fairly complicated thing to buy. There is some guidance here. I am updating this, but this one's currently available. So you can take this and learn some of the tips for sustainable IT purchasing. And last but not least, I would be very remiss, next slide please, if I didn't just give you a heads up. You may or may not have heard of the SPLC, Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. This is a wonderful organization. They're based in the US, but do a lot of work internationally as well. There were some Canadians at last year's summit. Highly encourage you to attend. It is a concentration of people, professionals working in this space, both sustainability and procurement, coming together to solve some of the tough challenges that we have. So I just recommend that you see if you can make it to this event. And I think the next slide is asking for questions, Leo.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. That was rich and a lot of content. And we do have some questions that have come through to the chat. And I want to just invite anyone else that has questions to take a moment to use the chat to ask those questions. I'm going to also unmute my colleague Zoe Burney, who is the one who worked on our supply chain management report recently. That was just launched this morning, or pre-launched this morning. And so I'm going to unmute her just in case there are some questions related to that work. But I think maybe I'll go right away to, it looks like Donna Jones has been really active in the Zoom chat there with a number of really great questions. And so I'll maybe just pick on one of them for a moment, because, and I'll throw this out to you, Francis and Amy first. I think this is kind of an interesting one. Donna asks, are there any companies using a platform for collaboration towards shared goals? She's talking about the non-linear nature of transformation and more self-organizing, and she adds, and to what extent are companies engaging employees in the identification of waste? So it's kind of a two-pronged question there about platform for collaboration and employee engagement around identification of waste. Francis,
so I'll jump in and take the collaboration one. I think from HP's perspective, we use many collaborations, whether it's working with your sister organization in the US on supply chain work, or whether it's even working with SPLC on helping to develop good standards. Collaboration is really important. I don't have any specific platforms that we're working on as HP. Maybe Amy has something else to add, and I'll leave it to Amy to answer the question on the employee engagement piece.
Yeah, I mean, I actually interpreted that question on collaboration a little bit differently. So the immediate thing that came to my mind was actually the SDGs. So, thinking about how businesses are working together to solve kind of global issues. So, I mean, one of the things that maybe I would recommend is, looking at some of the companies who are a part of the SDGs, or who have set goals that are related to some of those SDGs. HP Inc. is one of them. So it might be a good start. And then the question on employee engagement is a really great one. And so you've really identified, I think quite correctly, that there is a significant opportunity to engage the workplace around, not just identifying waste, but identifying all kinds of solutions for sustainability. It's ultimately them who know their role the best. So, a lot of it is not necessarily you as a sustainability person prescribing what they should do, but you actually having a conversation and asking them what are some of the things that they can do. And so some of the ways that we've seen that through our champions and our companies that we've collaborated with or been involved with is something as simple as hosting, a challenge or a competition for employees, and asking them, hey, if you come up with a suggestion on how you can improve the sustainability of your role, then you can be entered into a draw for a meeting with the CEO, or you can win a prize. And we found that that really fosters a lot of engagement, and it really kind of, not only that, but helps to make employees feel a little bit more included in the decision-making process as well, if they have the opportunity to provide their input. And also, if there's any opportunity for that suggestion to actually be implemented, that's even better.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was really good. One other question that has come through the Zoom chat there is a question about whether the majority of companies in Canada are more centralized, have more centralized decision making, and whether that's the norm, or is there more self-management that's distributed in terms of decision making. Francis, can you just clarify what the case is in HP, and then maybe we'll ask a few others that might have some thoughts about the broader Canadian question.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this question is really getting at, is Canada a branch plant country, which I think is often criticized for being that, or is it really looking at when you get into the actual different departments, how much individual decision? It's a very tough question to answer. Canada's a land of small and medium businesses for the most part, so speaking from a large corporate perspective wouldn't necessarily be reflective of what's happening in Canada as a whole.
Yeah, Amy, anything to add to that in terms of the broader Canadian landscape?
Yeah, I mean, basically just echoing Francis in that Canada is, I think 98% of Canadian businesses are small to medium sized. So I think it would be, my kind of initial thought is that, because of that, there might not be, it might not be as centralized, or sorry, as kind of distributed. But again, I think that there's probably more research on that question that needs to happen.
Just to clarify, it looks like Donna, who asked the original question, is saying the question is really more about organizational design rather than the branch plant or the subsidiary kind of mindset. I think I understand where this question is coming from. I certainly can speak to my own career in the energy sector, where I worked for large companies who actually had several kind of epiphanies of, hey, we should centralize, and everything gets amalgamated into one master group that makes decisions for different locations and different functions. And then, oh no, we need to empower people through decentralized. And it seemed from my own observations in my career that it was a process that went back and forth, and it almost felt like a sort of just an exercise in keeping people busy. But I don't know, does that clarification, does that change the question for you at all, or the way that you would answer that, or similar?
No, I think it's really difficult to characterize. You've got everything, right? And I certainly haven't done a lot of research in this space, so I know the companies we work with through WWF, through the Living Planet at Work program. But yeah, I can't really speak to that any more than I just did.
Yeah, and Zoe, I'd like to ask you: did that come up in the research that you did on sustainable supply chains?
I think not so much specifically, but I think definitely there was a more proactive approach when the decisions were coming from a sort of sustainability team, where there was evidence of, a platform of people that were really aggressively working towards sustainable supply chains. So that's sort of as much as I can add to that, I think.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, and the reason going to Zoe is Zoe prepared some of the research that we're releasing around supply chains. I'm going to go to one more question. It comes from Cornelio. He's saying that this is directed towards you, Francis, but he wants to know, how are you engaging other stakeholders into the equation, such as local governments, universities, and others that are supporting your key partners in the supply chain?
So it's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Absolutely important. It is about partnering. So one of the ways, doing some work with the federal government, doing some work with MCSP, the Municipal Collaboration for Sustainable Procurement, working with the Ontario Universities Buying Group, anybody who will talk to me on this subject, actually. So reaching far and wide to try and spread the news. And of course, once we've gotten this case study done and really nicely well-rounded, and hopefully all of you've had some input into it for the Living Planet at Work program, we will then hopefully morph it into the Living Planet at Campus program so that we can start getting more students and more campuses engaged in sustainable procurement as well. So, but there are many, many other opportunities, I know. I'm just one person, and so the challenge is to all of us to take this and run with the baton now.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think that we're going to just take the last couple of minutes here. There's, just to wrap up, there's a few more questions, and actually a really interesting conversation that's breaking out in the chat. If you haven't taken a peek at it yet, certainly some of the people on chat here are saying that they're feeling that Canada is behind on this compared to other places, especially Europe. Yeah, maybe we should do a follow-up at a future date to look at some of the European practices and trying to learn from that if there's strong feeling that there's some leadership there. We're really fortunate to have some leadership right here in the form of a case study that we wanted to bring to you on this partnership between HP Canada and WWF Canada. And I really want to thank you for participating in our webinar. Francis Edmonds, the head of sustainability at HP Canada, and Amy Castader, the Living Planet at Work specialist with WWF Canada. Thank you so much to both of you for making time to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you who have joined us today. Just so you know that after this webinar is over, you will be able to find a recording of it on our website, which is CBSR.ca. And if you click Our Work and then Webinars from the drop-down menu, you'll find it there. And if you missed a portion of it, or if you know somebody who'd get a lot out of this, please do share a link with them directly from our site. You might also be interested to know that we're going to do something similar again next month on October 19th, when we demystify green bonds with Nicole Vidori, who's the Associate VP and Head of Environment at TD Bank, as well as Marian Oliver, the Sustainable Finance Solutions Manager with Sustainalytics. Please join us for that. That's going to be a really good one as well. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter from our website to stay up to date with other upcoming events and opportunities. And if you're already subscribed, again, please share the newsletter with one other person in your network that you think would also benefit from the subject matter here. Finally, don't forget that we have shared your sort of a test audience with us because we've pre-launched a new Sustainable Supply Chains in Canada report that was sent to people who pre-registered for this. If you go to our website, you can find it there, or email us at info@cbsr.ca, and we will email it to you. Thank you, and have a great day.